Okay.
Okay, here we go. Well, hello everyone once again, and welcome to the second of the ICOMOS New Zealand talks for March 2023. In particular, a very warm welcome to our special guest, Peter Cox, as well as our audience online. So I'm Stacey, and I am an elected board member of the International Council for Monuments and Sites, also known as ICOMOS. And this morning, I'll be sharing a few words just to well, help get us started. So for those who are new to ICOMOS or who are interested perhaps in learning more, we are an intergovernmental organization of or group who is devoted to the safeguarding of places of value and to the conservation of the world's historic monuments and sites. We were founded in 1965 and at the moment based in Paris, France. There are approximately 10,500 members and national chapters in over 107 countries, as well as close to 30 ISCs. Our local chapter here was also founded in 1987. So I am aware that by now many of those joining us via Zoom as well as in person perhaps will know our speaker very well through his many years of work with these networks. So Peter, in short, is a founding member and the current managing director of Carrig Conservation, which was founded in 1995. He is an expert in the upgrade of existing buildings, and since 2012 he has served as the president of the ISCES. In 2019, Peter was brought on as a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts for his services, and he has done extensive work with governments, local authorities, universities to improve the laws and policies around the upgrade of our older building stock. So the program for this afternoon will open with a lecture that is focused on unpacking the relationship between cultural heritage and climate action with reference to the various ICOMOS initiatives and campaigns that have been developed in response. So really at that, a few housekeeping points for everyone. If you are taking part via Zoom, please do ensure that your mic is muted if you're not speaking. But if you do have a question for our speaker, please do feel free to post this in the chat, as we will come back to those in the Q&A segment of the session. So really at that, I will hand over and once again, a very warm welcome to everyone and especially to our speaker, Peter. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Stacey, and hello everybody, and the massive audience here in front of me, two, which is good. So I'll kind of go straight into it. We've been involved in a number of studies looking at how do we value carbon in the built environment, and that leads then on to how do we energy upgrade our buildings, and particularly heritage and traditional buildings. And then I have a short case study of an important building that we worked on. This building in the photograph is actually the rear of what was the starting building for University College Dublin, and right in the city centre. They quickly, in the 1960s, had to move out of town to build a big new campus out there. They retained this building, but it's been kind of not used. And in I think it was about 18, we got the job to convert these 3 Georgian buildings into what is now known as MOLI, which is the Museum of Literature of Ireland. And it's now a major kind of tourist building. Because of that, we had to put in a separate lift which is the kind of glazed box there on the right, but that gives us links and access to all levels. So that was an interesting one to work on. It was really the drive for energy efficiency. So we didn't, we just did the conservation element of this building. So we'll talk about the built environment, our study and findings, and then the case study on the rubrics. But 60% of total global carbon emissions come from the built environment or construction, including materials, construction, and operations. And I suppose what we're trying to get across is we need to know more about the balance. We tend to, and with a lot of European legislation came out in 2009 in the Energy Performance Building Directive, which was signed off by all countries in 2009, to drive towards what we call NZEB, which is near zero energy buildings. But it all concentrated on operational energy, which is fine, but it's not the whole story. So we wanted to look at how do we understand embodied carbon, how we understand embedded carbon, and the difference between those two. Embodied is what is existing in an existing building. So if your building is built 100 years ago, it's well paid back its carbon. If we do any interventions in the building, like adding insulation or adding new windows or new floors, that's embedded carbon, because everything has a carbon cost. So we try to differentiate, but we try to balance that. So when we're looking at embedded carbons, we want to use low carbon solutions rather than carbon intensive solutions. Just in 2021, I think it was, the European Union signed in the European Green Deal, which they've allocated a huge amount of money, which will be ring-fenced for this project. And it means countries like Ireland, any European country, in fact, can apply to get funding to implement energy efficiency measures and driving. And the kind of overall is to double the annual energy renovation rates in the next 10 years of our existing buildings. And they give us grants to do that. They give governments grants that then be turned into tax incentives to do certain things in certain buildings, or indeed areas. And it's not only dwellings or residential use, it's also for academic use, it's for also commercial use. And so bodies can apply and get a grant to, say, convert. And what we're finding a lot certainly in Ireland, UK, and Europe, is that we have an awful lot of big, large office blocks dating from the early 2000s even, and they are now no longer filled because people are working from home. And is there an opportunity to convert, let's say, a third of a 9-story building into residential, and have this balance, which would be, we think, is great, because if you do have the balance, it's really important. We're lucky in Ireland that we had a very good minister who actually is now our president, would you believe? Michael D. Higgins is his name, and he was at the time, in the late 90s, Minister for Culture, Heritage, the Gaeltacht, which is the Irish-speaking regions, and the islands, and anything else that was not in a ministry. But he was very forward-thinking, and he actually brought in very tight legislation on the protection of our built heritage but also started the Heritage Council, for instance, which is a funding body to help move that way. But one of the other things that the then Department of Environment, Local Government and Heritage implemented was a national inventory of architectural heritage. So this government department, there was a unit within that government department that was specifically set up to promote the recording of all architectural heritage. And that then went out to local authorities. And we have 26 counties within Ireland, and each county has a county council. Some of them have a county council and a city council, if you like Dublin. But they all got money from central government to commission people like us to do this national inventory. And it's a fantastic reservoir of data of buildings, building types, building use, and conditions generally. So we can work from that to then, we have a starting line, if you like, a baseline. And one of the things that we really want to get across to people, and particularly students, of architecture, is we need to look more at the life cycle analysis of a building. And that means the total assessment of environmental performance of the materials from the raw extraction to manufacturing to delivering to site or across countries. In fact, the globalization means that we're using granite from China and, etc. So it's important to know, and then at the end of life, the disposal and the recycling and cyclability. And we call it the cradle to grave approach of environmental assessment of buildings. And together with some other people, we're trying to, there are many life cycle analysis tools out there for modern buildings or for new buildings. There's none specifically for heritage or traditional buildings. And we're trying to actually develop a specific tool that will do that. So embodied carbon is the carbon emitted during extraction, manufacture, transportation, and construction of buildings, as well as maintenance and end-of-life emissions. And the whole recyclability, or the circle economy as it's becoming known now, is that if we can develop and build and design buildings that can be recycled or demented or whatever, that's a really good way of going forward. And then you've got the operational carbon, and that's carbon emissions that result from the day-to-day use of a building through energy consumption. And that's kind of, if you like, the easy pickings, because if you've got an oil-based burner to heat or cool your building, then if you can get a more renewable source or a less fossil-based source, then you're making certainly inroads into reducing your CO2 emissions. But if you're not doing an upgrade to your building per se, and this happened in the UK after 2009, the government started offering grants to put in heat pumps, and people just took the grant, put in a heat pump, didn't do anything to their building. And 10 years later, we're taking out those heat pumps and putting back gas boilers because they're not effective. And they're not effective because the building is still leaky. And so what we've found in our studies is that if we can improve the kind of upgrading of our building physics, our buildings kind of materials by 30 to 40%, then a heat pump works. And that's quite simple. Good insulation in the floor, good insulation in the attic, upgrade your windows and not replace them, but at least make them more functional. You can often achieve that, and then a heat pump, yes, will work. And therefore you are reducing the overall CO2 emissions of that. the study that we did was actually for Historic England, which is a body in the UK, which is funded by central government, but it's manned by professionals. And they commission a lot of research work. And this study was well, it was called the Understanding Carbon in the Built Environment. And it is now in public domain, so it can be downloaded. But we looked at potential carbon emissions that could be saved through a policy of adaptive reuse and retrofit rather than demolish and build new. And that's where the life cycle, we analyzed every life cycle analysis tool that was in the world, and we found none of them are suitable for existing and particularly heritage buildings. And what we did was take 4 dwelling retrofits from 1890s, end of terrace, early 1900s, mid-terrace, because when you've got a mid-terrace, you've only got 2 walls exposed, as opposed to an end of terrace that has 3, or a detached, which has 4. And then we looked at a semi-detached and a 1990s, going right up to 1990s. And we effectively took a base kind of case where we looked at the building, said, right, this is the carbon footprint of this building. And this building, the only really CO2 emissions from an existing building, let's say over 60 years old, is the operational energy. And that, of course, because it was fossil, is on the up and up. We then looked at a refurbishment where we do an energy efficiency upgrades to that building. And then finally and virtually, we demolished the building, measured, getting rid of all the embodied carbon, bringing it to the dump site and getting rid of it, and then using new building materials, and often carbon intensive materials, which is common these days. What we measured, you know, the reactions of that. And we also looked at not only the carbon, but also the marginal abatement costs. And this is a kind of a system in the UK, particularly, where it looks as cost per ton of carbon dioxide. But what we found is that by doing the adaptive reuse and upgrade is far more kind of carbon effective and cost effective than replacing any of the buildings that we talked about. And the worst case scenario, and unfortunately this slide didn't work for me, but I had a little red circle. But if you can see my cursor, can you know? Oh, can you see that cursor? No. Well, basically the dark blue line is do nothing. And that means the carbon is increasing because of operational carbon, and the kind of, if you like, the leaky building. The dotted line is where you demolish it, build a new build, and you'll see there's a big increase in the initial carbon, and then it continues to go up. If you do the renovation refurb, then that's a gradual increase or decrease of carbon. And it takes 63 years to pay back the carbon to replace a simple building with a new building. And that's really what we need to get across to people. So deep energy efficient refurbishment of historic buildings is necessary if we are going to achieve performances similar to new buildings. I also have a lot of argument, and I don't have time in this lecture to go into it, but building new buildings with carbon intensive products is not good for the environment. And I know there's a housing shortage, and I know that, you know, but if we can look, and particularly, as I said earlier, that we're beginning to see a lot of commercial buildings being vacant because there aren't that many people working in them anymore and working from home, then this could become a solution to both our housing shortage and also our reducing our carbon and particularly our emissions. The quantity and type of materials matter that you either put into a building or take out of a building. The simple use of an LCA tool can help, and particularly at concept design stage, because that's the important bit. And then EPDs is our environmental product declarations. And France is the first country in Europe to introduce legislation that all companies manufacturing anything has to have an independently certified EPD. And that is going to become law throughout the rest of Europe probably next year. And we're already seeing a lot of the more conscious companies actually doing that and coming out with EPDs, because they know that in 2 years' time, building regulations will be changed to say that you have to have an EPD, and if you don't, then we can't use your product. And so they are going to, and I think that's the best way to get that. And that will evaluate from, as I say, extraction to storage to packaging to delivery to end of use. But the problem we find, and I'm sure it's here as well, is there isn't enough hard data to actually convince people of this. And we need more examples, we need more research in this area. So an LCA tool really should be easy to use, applicable to historic buildings, useful for concept design stage. And then planning process should allow for LCA so that the most sustainable decisions is made. We did find a couple of years ago, because we came up with a good solution to a building and the owner went for planning. The planning officer didn't understand what we were doing and therefore refused planning, first of all. And we had to go back into them and explain them how and what we were doing, and what we were doing was right and for the building. So we need more education to planning systems, but also better informed planners, if you like. So we're hoping to come up with this kind of product, and which will be a sustainable tool, a suitable guidelines on sustainable historic refurbishment. That's already in train. That'll be published in about August, I think, certainly in Ireland, and it'll be available. And then all materials used in building and construction sector in Ireland must have EPDs, and that we expect, as I say, to be law by next June 24. So the circular economy is certainly very a good move, and there is more buy-in, certainly in Europe, on this, and it's designed for reuse, recognizing value of waste. Tax incentives must be introduced to encourage material reuse, and then local authorities could provide the skills to facilitate sustainable decisions. This is the full document that we produced. It's on the Historic England website. It's also on our website, and they call it Heritage Counts, and they do a publication every year of different studies. And this is a really good one. I don't know if the Scan Me will work here, but if anybody wants a copy of it and can't get it, then let me know, and or Stacey, and we can actually send you a copy. Some of the new research projects that we're involved in, we've just won recently, and Smart Cities started in September last year, and we're working with Limerick City Council in the southwest of Ireland, University of Limerick, and a few other partners, and we are looking to create a carbon neutral city block in the historic quarter. And this will involve about 100 buildings ranging from early Georgians from 1750s, say, right up to the 1990s, 1995. And we're looking at a host of, we're first of all evaluating the use of energy and what type of energy they use. But also there's been new buildings such as a very large Limerick City Council building with a large car park, high-rise car park. So there's an opportunity to put a mini PV kind of farm on the roof of it to supply to neighboring historic buildings. And there's no one easy solution. We've got to look and think outside the box. The other one that we're working with University College Dublin is we're taking 50 typologies of heritage and traditional buildings, and we're physically measuring the U value, but I believe it's OR value here. And that is going to then form the basis of a database that will be available to everybody. So if we've hit every typology of heritage and traditional building, you'll be able to go into that next year and say, right, oh, that's like my building, and that'll give you an accurate starting point for evaluating your energy efficiency measures. And then renewables, we have to use renewables, and we're looking at PV panels, we're looking at geothermal, and obviously wind in certain areas, but you can't put a big windmill in the city centre heritage area. Not yet, anyway. Might come to that someday. So this is the smart city one, and this is the area which is around a river. And in fact, we've just got planning permission to put a windmill in the river that will, generate some power. That took some going because of not only bird life, but fish life and everything else. But it's going to be an exciting project. But as I say, we're looking at a carbon neutral city block for the historic quarter. And this is a widget that we're putting into 100 homes onto the energy source in each building. And it will remotely record the use of that energy and whether we can, and then we can, through calculations and other methods, that we can then go back to those people and say, well, actually, if you had your bath or had boiled your kettle at 7 o'clock instead of 5 o'clock when energy is at its height, you could save energy, and this is part of this process, and it's been funded to put these into 100 different houses, which will be really great. And I think the most exciting one from an economic point of view is there really is serious talk in Europe at the moment on carbon fine for demolition and a carbon credit for adaptive reuse. And that will really flip the economics of development on its head, really. And I think this is an important, it's going through early kind of consultation within the EU at the moment, and we're hoping that it'll be put out there as possible legislation mid next year. I'm going to show you now just a quick case study that we're working on, or just finishing at the moment, which is a really exciting project. And we were the conservation and energy retrofit consultants on this project. And that building facing you there is called the Rubrics building. It's in Trinity College, which is a campus right in the middle of the city centre. The building was built in 1698, so it's Georgian by nature, or title, but it's really, and it was built as a residence for emeritus professors and visiting lecturers. And it's the oldest building in Ireland that has been in continuous residential use since it's built. So we were, it was pretty run down, I have to say, when we went there. Although two emeritus professors still refused to leave the building. But we convinced them in the end. But and then the other funny one is we discovered nobody knew there was a basement in this building. And then we found a semi-basement, and it was funny. If you asked the students, the first question was, would there be some wine down there from 1699? But when you ask the professors, you're more likely to find a few dead professors down there. We found neither, but it was interesting to discover that, because it had been covered up in the 1950s, and nobody. One old professor thought he knew there was a basement, but he didn't know where. So we went, and it's a protected structure and a recorded monument, which is the highest protection you can get in Ireland. So we had to go through a lot of kind of rigmarole on that. It's a landmark building, obviously. It was built, as I say, and then it really incorporated 5 houses. And what we're doing with it now is we're putting it back into residential use, but a third of it will be for emeritus professors, a third of it for visiting lecturers, but the other third will be for student accommodation. And there's already a bun fight started with the students wanting to live in this building. And the picture on the bottom left is the back of the building from historic photographs, and we discovered that this was originally lime harled, which is a lime mortar that's thrown at the building rather than put on. So we wanted to, and sorry, in the 1950s, somebody had come along and put a cement pebble dash on it, which was something awful. This is an aerial shot of it with the rest of the campus. And you can actually, you might be able to see on some of the other granite buildings, they have a high parapet, and we've been able to put PV panels behind the parapets and yet get the sun. So from ground, you can't see them, but they're producing about 5% of the energy, and particularly kind of central lighting and things. So they want comfortable accommodation for fellows and students, improve energy efficiency, low carbon project, sustainable heating system, all new electrics, plumbing and sanitation, new kitchens and bathrooms. A lot of them didn't have them. One old professor said he remembered when he moved into it first, he had to go out and pee in the park. So it was pretty basic. And then, of course, we had to comply with modern fire safety, which is often a challenge in some of these buildings. So we provided the conservation and fabric retrofit strategy. We worked closely with the design team, a full design team, architect, engineers, mechanical, electrical engineers. But we were lucky also that the college gave us the time to do research and reporting on it and to really understand our building. And then we had numerous pre-planning meetings with the planners to make sure that they were on the same wavelength as us. And then we went into design tender stage and then construction handover. And in fact, it's been handed back to the college while I'm here. So as I say, the back was originally harled, then pebble dash added, cement pebble dash added in the 20th century. The cut jambs and lintels were replaced for some reason, we don't know why. And then there were some new cast in situ window heads, which we left. They were perfectly in good order. And then there was a lot of undulating stonework, because this was a stone kind of main fabric. So we removed the cementitious dash. And this here, you can see the rubble stone. And then we started putting the niacin diaphanite which is a lime-based render that has cork in it and is called an insulating render. And in research that we've done, mainly in Germany, we've actually put this on a 1720s building, and we've measured its performance over the last 5 years. And a simple 40 mil thick render with cork incorporated in it increases or decreases the U value of that wall by 35%, which is quite phenomenal. And there's a number of products that are like that. We found the Italian one, diathanite, is the most kind of best performing, if you like. But because it was originally hurled, we then did a lot of testing on doing just a final lime dash on top of the render so that you got the visual, the aesthetic of what it would have been looked like. And we did advanced weathering tests on that, etc. And then we go into evaluating what sand would have been used, the size, fines, and etc. So because we do all this materials analysis prior to writing specs, we can be very kind of special on writing the specs. We hired some of the best subcontractors, and again, the college allowed us to do that, even though it was a public kind of procurement project, which often kind of means you have to take the lowest price, and that's usually bad. So here it is on the bottom left at its final coat prior to the hurling. But it's worked tremendous, and we've been measuring the performance over the period of construction, and it's just phenomenal. From an internal point of view, then we like to do a lot of evaluating before we decide what we're doing, because if you're taking calculative evaluations on how things are going to perform or how to do interventions, you don't have the actual information to make the decisions that you want. So we carry out indoor air quality monitoring, and this is over maybe a couple of weeks where we put these widgets in the existing rooms and we measure the current indoor air quality. We will also we've been commissioned to do a post-occupancy series of tests as well. We have invested in equipment to do in situ or value tests, where we put a widget on the outside and on the inside, and we can measure the heat flux, heat loss on the walls sections, but also on the window sections. And therefore, we know that we have the accurate information. We have a system in Ireland since the introduction of the energy performance in buildings called BER, which is Building Energy Rating. And if you want to rent a house, rent a flat, sell an industrial building, sell an office block, you must have a BER cert. And this is a tick box system that was designed for post-1970 buildings. And if you have a building that has a solid single panel external envelope, it gives an automatic default of 2.2 U value. I don't know what the conversion is towards, so apologies for that. But if we were to do that on this building, we would have had to put about 200 millimeter of insulation on the inside in order to meet the BER. When we did our physical U value testing, as in this picture, we discovered the front wall, the brick wall, that was 450 mil, was actually giving us a U value of 0.83. And that is equivalent to a brand new building. So we didn't need to put insulation on the inside. The back wall, that was the rubble stone wall, was coming out at about 1.1. But when we put the insulated render on and remeasured it, it's down to 0.89. So we didn't have to put any internal insulation on walls in this building, which just shows you that if you do it right, you can reduce the carbon footprint immediately, but get a good performance.
So that use that 2.2 is about 0.05, and you've gone to 1.1.
Right. Okay, thank you. Sorry, well, this will come up on when you can keep a copy of this and share it with the audience. It's too detailed to go into. We also do go into the building materials side because that's our background, if you like. But this is a simple called a Rylam tube test, where you have a calibrated plastic tube. You stick it on with blue tack, and you fill it with water up to 0, and then you measure the drop of water, and that gives you the porosity of the brick or the stone or whatever you want to test. And here you can see we've done some of the tests across mortar joints so that we get the whole picture, and some just on the brick. And then that gives us a calculation that we can put into our final calculation of what do we need to do with this building. And then we also, because we're affiliated to Trinity College, we have access to all the geology labs, and we took a core sample of the stone back, and we did a full petrographic analysis that gave us not only the components, but also the porosity, the strength, and everything. So we do go into this in detail, but at the end of the day, it makes the building cost secure, because we knew what we were specifying, that it would perform, and therefore was costed right. And in fact, this building did not run a penny over the budget, which is pretty amazing. But it's all down to really analyzing the materials of the building first. We do condensation risk analysis, because that's one of the biggest problems in older buildings, particularly if you're using newer materials like closed insulation systems that will cause problems with moisture. We do a full thermal bridge analysis to see where the leaky points are, and we can then address those. So, and this is some of the work in Train. The slate on the roof was an original English slate, which wouldn't have been original to the 1690s building, but was actually replaced in 1895 or thereabouts. And it was so bad you could stick your finger through the slate. So we replaced all the slate, but we took that opportunity then to really do a fantastic insulation job on the roof, which really has performed tremendously well. We then reslated it with an Irish slate, so that reduced the carbon footprint of bringing stuff from England. And this is some of the other photographs. Now, the roof was extended in 1894, and that's why the steel is there. That's from 1894. We decided to leave it there, not to change it. So we used all that information to get there. There were timber, kind of suspended timber floors on the ground floor, and there was quite a void. So we were able to put this geocell, which is a recycled glass insulation, on the ground and leave a gap, which allowed air movement. And again, this is performing really well. And we've, at the moment, we're producing about 75% of the energy of that building by the geothermal 21 boreholes that we put in the grounds. And then it's landscaped again over, so there's no visible kind of destruction to the green area. And already, even though it hasn't been released or publicly opened, enough people have discovered it, and they are trying to chuck awards at it, which of course we'll accept. But so I'll be going back to a flurry of activity on this building. Just to finish off with a couple of kind of adaptive reuse. This is a church, again, dating from about 1720. It was deconsecrated in the 1960s as, you know, a fallen congregation, and moved to a neighboring church. And in 1986, some kids broke into it and set fire to it. And as you can see, the roof's gone and the chancel. And this is the poor architect, Derek Tynan, who was looking down and said, Jesus, what have I done? How do I fix this? Anyway, we did. and that's what it looks like today. And if you note, we found a full vaults underneath the church, which had many, many burials in it, which we couldn't A, disturb, but B, we couldn't put 3 loads of floors on it. So we designed these steel trusses to sit on the original walls to hang the 2 upper floors. And then just the ground floor sits on the ground floor. And it's now an office for about, I think, 78 or 80 people. And again, we've managed to win, I think, 8 awards on that one for various things. So, and we used some of there was one empty vault that we were able to use for natural air ventilation and cooling. And on the fixed roof part, we have PV panels, and we kept the main chancel open and with lights, you know, kind of windows on top. The side walls, there's about a meter and a bit between that, and part of that was a tax incentive scheme that if you open a public building or a building to the public for 19 days a year, you can claim your conservation costs against your tax. So the developer of this did that. We did a deal with the local School of Art, and every end of year they do an art exhibition on the walls, and people can walk around and look at it, and they run it for 19 days. The owner gets tax back, which is a good scheme. So I think that's it. We hope to get to this someday. Probably not in my lifetime, sadly, but we hope, we can hope. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter, for taking the time to share your thoughts with us today. Now, I do realize that within our ICOMOS networks, we do often promote the concept of the notion that climate change is a culture issue, and vice versa, culture is a climate change issue as well. So once again, cheers for helping us unpack what some examples of culture-driven climate action might look like. So now, as we move through to the second half of our session here, I can see there's around, I think, 30 of us online. So we're very warmly inviting questions, thoughts from our audience. Please do feel free to raise your hand or post a question in the chat. I can see that, in fact, we already do have one question. Two. So we'll start with the first one up there. So if you're still with us, is it Ermina Petrovic? Please feel free to unmute yourself and share your question with our speaker.
So my question was, because I like to nitpick on things like that, you had some photos of building roofs being, you know, fixed while being under big plastic wraps. I'm curious about embodied energy and impact of the plastic wrap itself, and how do you count it? Nitpicking, sorry. Exciting work in every other way, so I'm finding, you know, super, because a lot of your stuff is finally considering things in great level of detail. I'm asking also a very detailed question.
part of the specification, Amina, was that any products used during the protection, because we don't have, I've been in New Zealand for 10 years or 10 days and feels like 10 years, but 10 days and I've only had 1 day of rain, you know. In Ireland, it'd be the other way around. And in fact, you might have rain every day at some stage. So we do have to protect our buildings. We also get colder, I think, nights than you. But part of the specification and part of the bid process from the contractor, and there are marks for it, is can they reuse any of the products? So the plastic, it's a particular, I'm trying to, something flex is the product name, but it's very durable and it's very reusable. So part of their methodology was that they would then use that on the next project and the next project. So we gave points for that. Now, obviously, we can't hand on heart say they will use this on the next project, but you know, at least that's where we start from. So, and likewise, scaffolding. If there's any scaffolding, that it's always reusable. That they don't use any sacrificial materials. But it's the best we can do when we have to protect. There's nothing else really that you can do. If we let water into that building, it'll destroy it. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, totally. Thank you very much.
Thank you both. So from a detail scale question to the, well, I suppose the wider picture, I was wondering, Manvi, are you still with us? As I can see that you've shared a question in the chat.
Hi, Stacey. Yes, I might have a fair bit of background noise, so I'll actually give it to you to read my question, please. But quickly, it was a great presentation. Thank you so much, Peter. This was amazing.
Thanks, Manvi. No problem. So her question is there any research available on operational carbon of our older timber buildings to that of new buildings? We usually have a tough time speaking with city planners in Wellington when we make our greenest, when we make our argument around the fact that our greenest building is the one standing.
I think the best one is the understanding carbon in the built environment. There's a whole section on that, and it's quite a large document, but I can certainly make links available through Stacey for that. I think, Stacey, you might already have it, but we can certainly share that. And there is 1 or 2 other studies that have been kind of starting looking at that comparative, because that is an important one. And if I can find any others, I'll send them to Stacey and she can circulate them.
Thank you so much. Thanks. Thanks, Stacey.
Absolutely. Thank you, Peter. So any further questions from our online audience? Please don't be shy. Please do raise your hand.
Can I ask one from the room? Peter, you're talking about the next project is trying to categorize something like 50 different building types. Why so many or why so few to put on the point of view? I don't know if they would have hit that online, like Peter.
Okay. Yes, Simon here is asking on the floor, in our next study called Fab Trads, and why they come up with these names, I don't know. But we're looking at evaluating 50 typologies of heritage and traditional structures. I think in Ireland, it probably covers 80% of older buildings. And we're particularly interested in what we call solid wall masonry, not later edition where you have post-1970 for oil crisis in Europe. they started introducing cavities, and then they started introducing insulation within cavities in new construction. So we're not interested in those. So it's really anything that has a solid wall, and that can be, in Ireland terms, that can be a kind of an early 20th century concrete wall that might be 225 mil thick and nothing else. It can be a Georgian building that's 450, kind of brick and stone building, kind of facade. It can be an earlier one with mud cottages built out of mud walls that are probably 1 meter thick. And then you can go to castles where they could be 3 meters thick of solid stone. So what we tried to do, and I suppose it's led, Simon, more by the amount of money available for this research, that we couldn't make it open-ended and say 150 building types. So we chose, and we sat down, and in fact, the Department of Housing that commissioned and paid for this, or will pay for this study, kind of sat with us when we won the project to identify the most common 50, because we said 50 is the monetary maximum, if you like. If we were going to do 150, it would be 3 times the amount of money, and that wasn't forthcoming from the department. So it's kind of tailor-made to the cost, unfortunately. But we also think 50 is a very good representative. If it was 5, it would be a waste of time, to be honest. And I hope that answers your question.
Fair enough. We suppose every good piece of research also must have a scope to it. So I've also got a question that I'll throw in at this point. So now I do know that we are joined by a mixed audience here, including students and emerging professionals, Peter. So just thinking now about the up and coming generation of those in our field. I was wondering, in your view, what do you see as some important skill sets for tackling some of these big challenges in the years ahead? So what are some emerging areas of discourse as well as practical skills that you think would be useful for students to have?
Do we have 6 hours? No, it's a great question, Stacey, and it is something that is close to our hearts, if you like, because we did run a what we called a 10 CPD training course in energy retrofit of heritage and traditional buildings. And we ran that in Dublin in late 2019, and thankfully finished in January 2020, just pre-COVID. And we booked a room, and we did it in conjunction with the Heritage Council of Ireland and an organisation within Ireland called the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland funded it, or part funded it. And then we charged a kind of a lower fee to participants. We based all our calculations on about 60 participants. Within 2 days of releasing the course, we had 100 signed up. And by the time we went live, the room would only hold 100. 100 attended every session. And we had 70 wait list on it. So there is a thirst for knowledge and information. And I think I think, Simon, I've shared that CPD course with you, and I don't mind that being shared among students. Or if there's something else you want from me, please, don't hesitate to ask. But I think, and the beauty about that course when we analyzed it afterwards was that there was a lot of architects, but there was quite a few engineers. There was a lot of state party people who obviously wanted to learn more about this. But the most interesting to me was we had about 10 contractors attend the course. And it was great to get the conversation between the professionals, the state, and the contractor. And that led us to forming an allegiance with another organization within Ireland, which is, well, they're regional, but it's called Wexford Waterford Enterprise Training Board. And they do training of skills rather than professionals. And we've now set up a small school in Waterford in the south of Ireland, where we're taking about 25 kind of craft workers to try and upskill them in the use of traditional materials, but also understanding, you know, that you can't stick polyurethane or polystyrene insulation on an old building. So that's kind of moving. And I think within ICOMOS, we should be doing something like that for the emerging professionals. One other project that we've just won, literally just before I came away, there are 6 architectural schools in Ireland run by different universities. And they have all come together for the first time ever. And they applied for money from the government, from the Department of Education, and they got it, 3.5 million. And it's to redefine the curriculum for training architects. And we've been brought in as a third party, if you like, to make sure that conservation and sustainability and climate change is included in this new curriculum, which will become the curriculum for all 6 schools in 2025. And I think that's a real good move, you know, from the Irish education sector, because I think we do need to start doing that. It's interesting that, you know, different schools, architectural schools, concentrate on different methods or different systems or different subjects. You know, some are science-based, some are architect-based, some are interior design, some are. So I think we really do need to add, you know, kind of sustainability, conservation, and climate change into all those schools, really.
Wow, that sounds like quite a suite of various efforts towards the sharing of resources and really thinking about the ways in which we can link arms to sort of drive these issues forward. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on that, Peter. Now, I mean, I'm aware that I am keeping an eye on the time. So really at this stage, I'd like to, open the floor once more. Are there any last or burning questions that you'd like to put to our speaker before he heads off? Once again, please don't be shy to speak up. Okay. Well, perhaps.
Sorry, wait. Sorry, Stacey, we have a question from the floor here.
Okay.
Well, I guess a brief thing is, it seems like New Zealand is kind of in this weird state of flux at the moment. But the discourse amongst the larger sort of the council seems to be a newer building is a greener building, and that is this real fight we're fighting. So it's just, and again, that there's developments happening here at the school where people are looking at new building materials that are recyclable, reusable, biodegradable. Do you see that in the future the 2 discourses can kind of sit really side by side, where you have the retention of buildings and then the research actually being renewable?
Yes.
I mean, that.
Did you hear that, Stacey, or should I repeat? I won't repeat all of it.
I think we could hear.
Well, effectively, what he was asking is, as we develop new material, new construction, well, first of all, people are saying new construction is a greener building. Well, I absolutely do not agree with that. And my good friend Carl Elefante came up with the catchphrase, the greenest building is the one that is already built. And that is absolutely the case at the moment. Yes, I think, you know, what I mentioned earlier, the EPDs, the Environmental Product Declarations, will lead companies to reduce their energy or their carbon footprint, which hopefully will develop into, yes, being able to design and build new buildings that are as green as an existing building, and the two can merge. There's absolutely nothing against that, and particularly here, as you do tend to use a lot of timber, but sadly in Ireland, I think 98% of our timber is exported, and we import 110% of our finished timber, which is absolutely stupid. And they are trying to change that. Our minister for, well, we have what we call a junior minister for forestry, and she's now trying to really drive to develop homemade timber and finished timber for the use in buildings. And we're using more and more timber construction in extensions to heritage buildings, because that is sustainable instead of using concrete blocks or steel or glass. So I think they will, and we have to do that, because, you know, again, our government is saying we need 30,000 new houses every year. Well, if they build them out of now building techniques, our CO2s are going to go through the sky, you know. So we do have to get there. Thank you. Okay. Stacey, back to you.
Okay, well, at that, if there aren't any further points, perhaps we'll take this as a chance to close off for now. But really, and a special thanks to Peter for your time, and Nigel for your support in organizing this session. So over to you, Nigel.
Thank you, Peter. It's very strange. We have a so-called Green Party that has confused coal damp buildings as being things that last forever. And in fact, we know that buildings, number one, don't last forever. And number two, if you look after them, you can improve the way things are inside them. And it's been very interesting to hear how you're going about not just keeping buildings going, but improving them so they actually meet today's needs, not just the needs of the way they were built. I have a very small gift for you, which is heavy. But if you look at Peter's website, you'll see that Peter runs a very interesting practice. When I was a student, practices would have had one woman and a collection of males. Peter's practice is a collection of women and one male, which is a great change. And I look forward to where we have everyone involved in the whole process. This is a book on female architects in New Zealand,
Oh, wow, brilliant.
which I hope you'll enjoy.
Well, certainly my staff will. Anyway.
So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Nigel.
Thank you, everyone online, and I guess we'll be closing down.
Okay, bye.
Thank you, Nigel. Thank you, Peter.